Hi, this is John from Dairyland Frights, and we have a treat for you. Over this long summer holiday, Memorial Day weekend, we have a special show, our best of so far. So, Megan, Brooke, and myself just want you to listen, lean back, have your favorite cocktail, and enjoy and stay spooky. Hello, spooky friends. Welcome to another episode of Dairyland Frights, the paranormal podcast that covers everything spooky, creepy, and mysterious in the Midwest. My name is John, and I'm here with my two co-hosts, Brooke and Megan. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Excited to hear about Door County from Megan today.
Yeah.
I'm also doing well.
Sounds exciting. So today, as you just heard, Megan is going to talk about the most haunted spots in Door County, Wisconsin. But first, Brooke, you have to do this because this is awesome stuff. Is going to offer a bit of paranormal news. Go ahead, Brooke.
Yeah, I'm excited. So we have talked about Zach Baggins a couple times on this podcast. He is I was gonna say friend of the show, but that's not accurate. He's a character of the show and of the paranormal community for sure. So I keep tabs on what's going on with him and Ghost Adventures, and same thing. Like I have a really close, my best friend Betsy. We've watched Ghost Adventures like our whole lives, so we like to stay up to date on the drama. So there's been some drama going on with Zach. I wanted to get you guys caught up because I feel like this is gonna continue to unfold over the next few weeks and months. So so to give you a little bit of backstory, so there's this guy Dakota Layden, and he actually kind of became a little bit famous by doing like parodies of Ghost Adventures on YouTube, and they were very funny. And then he ended up being on the show as like a guest of like quite a few years back. And from that, he actually ended up with his own show on the Travel Channel called Destination Fear, which was produced by Zach Baggins. And so they were like pretty good friends. But they recently like had a falling out. So Destination Fear was canceled, and Zach Baggins like was no longer listed as a producer, I believe. And so people kind of came to the conclusion that Zach was like sabotaging the show because it got like too popular and was like overtaking Ghost Adventures in ratings or something along those lines. This is all allegedly. I'm not really sure if that's accurate, but Dakota kind of confirmed that Zach had something to do with it. And after that, Nick Groff kind of got into the mix. And Nick used to be on Ghost Adventures. Like 9 years ago, he left the show, and it was kind of like not understood why that happened. But he kind of like took Dakota's side, I guess, publicly, and he put out a video about Zach mostly. Although it's kind of funny because he refers to Zach in this video as the host. Like he doesn't really say Zach's name exactly, but everyone can assume that he's referring to Zach. So he said a couple things. So apparently Dakota told him that on one of their show recordings, Zach like walked in laughing, saying like, "Oh, Nick's never going to work in America again," because he gave the network Travel Channel an ultimatum to basically choose between Zach or Nick. And as we all know, Travel Channel is kind of like the hub for like paranormal content nowadays for whatever reason. That's like all they really show is like ghost content. Yeah, it's not really like travel stuff anymore. It's traveling to haunted locations. But yeah, so like Nick has pretty much been ousted from the Travel Channel because Zach like made it that way, and Dakota like confirmed that. And also like there was this story going around that Aaron was saying that Nick was fired from the show because Nick was going behind Zach and Aaron's back creating a new show without them knowing. But apparently, according to Nick, that's false, and that they were all allowed to produce other shows alongside Ghost Adventures, and apparently Zach was also doing that. He also claimed that Zach has a really bad ego, that treats people really poorly, that he blocks everyone who questions him, because one person actually in one of the questions they asked Nick was like, oh, I questioned like some tiny thing about him and he blocked me on Twitter. And I was like, girl, same.
Literally.
So yeah, apparently it's not just me. And then he creates like a hostile environment. And it was kind of funny. So in the end, he says something along the lines of like, oh, I can't wait to bring more real paranormal content to everyone. And he was like very heavy on the word real, almost like implying that Ghost Adventures is like kind of fake. I don't think it used to be, honestly, but I think, nowadays.
Yeah.
Also, similarly, Dakota also implied some things. He implied specifically that Ghost Adventures does not get locked down from dusk until dawn like they claim they do, and that they just like go on site for like a couple hours and leave. Like they used to get locked down all night, but they don't anymore. So yeah, a lot going on in the Ghost Adventures cinematic universe at the moment. But
so Brooke, what do you make out of all this? Since you're a fan of the show, and I'm a fan, Megan is too. But what do you make out of all that?
I honestly am not like watched a ton since Nick left, because it just kind of wasn't the same dynamic anymore, and I didn't like it as much. But I feel like it's all like a little bit petty, to be honest. But I do still like believe Dakota and Nick. I think that they are probably telling the truth. That Zach, I mean, he seems like he would be kind of a jerk. So I'm not like, I'm not exactly surprised that he would like try to oust other people from being on the Travel Channel, like in terms of paranormal content creators. But at the same time, though, like Zach kind of did make the Travel Channel what it is and made Ghost Adventures what it is.
Sure.
So in a way, I guess, if he wants to have control over of that, I guess maybe that's like that's up to him, I guess. I don't know. I think the Travel Channel really cares about like what Zach thinks and what he wants. So
wow. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know.
Megan, do you have any thoughts about this?
I mean, I never really took Ghost Adventures super seriously, so I guess I can see how that might make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just this sounds like someone who's gotten a big head, like us. We're starting out right now, and once we become more successful,
one of us oust the other, for sure.
One of us be a dynamic. There's gonna be a power dynamic. Megan, Brooke, and John going at it
for sure.
I'm gonna be on. You guys will be on TikTok. I'll be on Facebook or some lame thing going.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they're light. I look forward to that. That's gonna be fun,
John.
I hope we get that big. Yeah.
Backstabbing each other. Oh, sweet. I'll come up with my own clothing line that you guys will hate.
Yes.
Then you can block Brooke.
Yeah, when I make fun of it.
I'm gonna block Brooke. Yeah, right. All right. So thank you, Brooke. That's really interesting. We will update people, obviously, once more infighting happens, which I'm sure Zach will come up with his version of the story.
Look forward to that.
Yeah. So, Megan, let's get into Door County and this spooky stuff.
All right. Thank you, John. So Door County is a super special place to me. It's a place that my family and I used to visit growing up. And there's just something like very special about it when you visit it. It doesn't quite feel like you're in Wisconsin. I don't know if there's, a place in your state that kind of feels that way. Just when you're there, it just feels really special. So this is a cool spot for me to talk about today. But what I didn't know growing up is that there's actually quite a bit of spooky, creepy history of Door County. So I did some research and I'm going to talk about that today. So a little bit of background. Door County, if you look at Wisconsin, it's kind of shaped like a mitten. Door County is that thumb of the mitten. So it's a peninsula between Green Bay and Lake Michigan in the state of Wisconsin. It's really cool. Would definitely recommend visiting it. It was founded in 1851, and as of 2021, there's just a little bit over 30,000 people who live in Door County. So not quite super big, actually. But it's a great place to visit in the summer. There's lots of things to do, especially for outdoorsy people. There's lots of wilderness trails that you can hike. There's different parks you can visit. Something really cool about it is that they have limestone cliffs there, and you can actually take your kayak and go kayaking into the caves along the shoreline. So super cool if you want to have a fun destination in Wisconsin. They've got ice cream, horseback riding. Something really cool on Washington Island is they have lavender fields. So you can go see this expansive field of purple flowers and you can take pictures.
Ooh.
Super cool. Would definitely recommend going there. Before I get into some of these scary haunted stories that I'm going to tell you guys today, I just wanted to call out a few cool memories that I have from Door County growing up, and I'm going to call those out because I think they're super cool places to visit and things to see if you want to check it out. So the first thing that I absolutely love about Door County is there's this festival in Ephraim, Wisconsin. It's called the Fear Ball. And this is a festival that kind of came about in the 1960s, and it was started to really honor the Scandinavian heritage of the area. And the point of it is to celebrate the end of winter. But the thing I really like about this is that there is symbolism behind the festival, and it is supposed to symbolize burning the winter witch and welcoming summer.
Nice.
Yeah, so how cool is that? So I think it's a little bit witchy, right up Brooke's alley.
Yes, I love that.
So with this burning of the winter witch, along the beach line, they build these big cone-shaped bonfires. So they're like big, huge logs. They're super tall. They're like probably twice the height of a human adult. And what they do is they set all of these bonfires on fire one by one. So you usually do it at night. So there's a whole bunch of different huge bonfires burning on the beach. And the chieftain is the one who lights the first one, lights the second one. So it's super cool. And something interesting about the fires is that they're really, really hot. So if you're even standing, 20 feet away, it feels like your skin is really hot. So super cool. But I like that it's symbolic of, burning the winter witch, welcoming summer. It's a great place to go. The next Fear Ball is going to be on June 17th, 2023, if anyone's interested in that.
It's funny. I feel like it's kind of funny that it's not until June because realistically, I feel like even in May, like there still might be a blizzard. So they put it in June to be safe. Like for sure now we're free of the winter witch.
Good point.
For sure. Yeah. In Wisconsin, you never quite know when there's going to be one last snow.
We just had one yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. So if you do go to Ephraim, make sure to check out Wilson's Ice Cream Parlor. It's a super cute little parlor that was built in 1906. So you can grab your ice cream and watch the winter witch burn.
Nice.
Oh, that's sweet. I love that.
It's a great family-friendly activity. All right, two quick things. Some other things that I'd recommend in Door County. There's this place called the Northern Sky Theater, and it's really cool because it's an outdoor theater in the middle of the woods. So you listen to shows while it's dark outside, and there's just like trees and birds, lots of bugs. Make sure you bring your bug spray.
Yes.
But super cool if you want that vibe. And then one last thing I wanted to point out is there's this ice cream shop in Fish Creek, and it's called Not Licked Yet Frozen Custard.
Nice.
Kind of fun. So you can get your ice cream, sit next to a creek next door, and you can feed the ducks.
Nice.
All right, so that was a little bit too feel good for me. So why don't we get into some scary stuff for Dark County? All right. So I did some research on Door County, and for some of you who don't know, Door County actually has kind of a dark past behind its name. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. There is some debate about the true origin of how it became Door County, but all the different stories kind of point to this Death's Door as inspiration for the name. It's called Death's Door because there has been a lot of deaths in the water by Door County. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. So a little bit of backstory about Door County. There is this strait that links Lake Michigan and Green Bay between the northern tip of Door County Peninsula and then Washington Island. At its narrowest point, it's only about 1.25 miles wide, so not super big, but I've seen it for myself. The water can get super choppy and there can be massive waves. There's hidden underwater rocks and just overall very unpredictable weather. So you really have to be careful when you're going boating on the water. But this kind of weather and these, unpredictable waves really contributed to the gruesome name of Door County. So I'm going to talk about the first theory of why it might be named Door County. So back in the 1600s, many Native Americans actually perished in the strait during an inter-tribe battle. And there were, some historic accounts that say members of the Potawatomi set out from Washington Island in order to attack the Winnebago on the mainland. So when the Potawatomi defenders were leaving the island, the weather was pretty calm. It seemed, safe enough to leave. But as they were mid-channel, the wind started picking up and, they were trying to get to the water or get to the other side, but the wind was picking up and canoes were capsizing. They were hitting rocks and breaking. And it was overall just a big, disaster. But the Winnebago continued to fight and both sides ended up losing hundreds of people. So that's kind of why the tribes and the settlers began to refer to the water as Death's Door out of, fear and reverence for the people who passed away. So that was all the way back in 1600s.
Yeah, Megan, I think that's a great Death's Door, man. That's awesome. That's an awesome name.
It's very interesting.
Very spooky.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right, next thing I'm going to talk about, we already talked about haunted roads, haunted bridges, but have you ever thought that lighthouses could be haunted?
Ooh,
I love haunted lighthouses.
So believe it or not, in Door County, there's actually a handful of haunted lighthouses. So I chose 3 of those today and I'm going to talk about them. And each one gets a little bit more spooky as we go. So you'll have to tell me what you think.
Nice.
All right. So the first one that I picked out is called the Sherwood Point Lighthouse. And this was built in 1883 at the Green Bay entrance to Sturgeon Bay. It's this, beautiful red brick house. It's about 1.5 stories high. And then it has this white square tower built on the back. So that's the lighthouse. So back in 1889, there was this keeper of the lighthouse, and his name was William Cotchams. And he decides to marry this woman named Minnie Hesh. Love that name. Super cool. So Minnie, she was actually, pretty cool because she was named the assistant keeper of the lighthouse. And that wasn't really a job that women had back in the day. So that was, pretty cool that she got, a very high-end job. But unfortunately, in 1928, Minnie did suffer from a stroke and she died while she was getting out of bed in the upstairs bedroom. So a little sad. But William ended up staying at the lighthouse until he retired in 1933. So there's been a few spooky things that have happened at this lighthouse. So residents and visitors of the lighthouse have heard noises at night, including voices and what they think sounds like clinking of teacups, which might make sense from the time period.
Yeah, exactly.
And other people have, seen this presence on the staircase. That's how they described it. So someone, a descendant of William Cotchams, his name is Robert Cotchams, he actually took a photograph of the lighthouse in 1984. And if you look at the photograph, it kind of shows like a human form in one of the windows. And I looked for this photo and I wasn't able to find it. So if anyone is able to find it, let us know. Yeah, I'm going to keep looking for it because it would be very cool to see if I could find it.
Yeah, Dairyland Frights at gmail.com.
Yes, send it over.
Thanks, John. A good call out for me. So maybe it's Minnie haunting the lighthouse. Who knows? But kind of seems like it's a friendly sort of ghost. Doesn't mean any harm. But this lighthouse is not open to the public. It is now used as a Coast Guard retreat of sorts. So it's still pretty cool to see. You just can't go into it.
Oh, Megan, just really quickly, at the end of the podcast, I will talk about each individual thing since I've been on the tour.
All right, perfect. Can't wait to hear, John.
Yeah.
All right, here is lighthouse number 2. It is called the Chambers Island Lighthouse. So this one is located on Chambers Island, which is about 7 miles northwest of Fish Creek. And this one is slightly older. It was built in 1868. So this one is really cool looking. It's made of tan bricks and it has this like circular stairway from the basement all the way to the lantern deck. Super cool, but the first haunting of the lighthouse actually occurred in the spring of 1976 when the caretaker of the lighthouse started hearing these, loud noises that kind of sounded like footsteps coming down the tower's staircase. So the sound kind of continued through the living room, and then he heard it in the kitchen, and then finally he heard this click, which sounded like the kitchen door closing by itself. Very interesting.
Love it.
So fast forward a few years, this is summer of 1979. The lighthouse was being renovated, but during this time, tools began disappearing and ending up in unlikely places, which actually makes me think of Summer Wind. We have another episode like that. Tools, when, buildings are being renovated, they just move, disappear. It's very interesting. Yes. So this is a little spooky to me. So some of the visitors who have stayed the night at the lighthouse have reported feeling like their beds were being grabbed and shaken.
Oh,
yeah.
I would be
that'd be creepy.
A little spooked out. I'd probably pack up my stuff and go sleep in a tent outside. Yeah,
there you go.
So there's a running theory that the ghost might be Lewis S. Williams, who was the first keeper of the lighthouse back in the late 1800s. And you can actually visit this lighthouse by special arrangement. You just have to get there by a private boat or an excursion boat. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
I want to stay there.
All right, Brooke, let us know how it goes.
I will.
All right, here's the very last haunted lighthouse I'm going to talk about. This one is the Potawatomi Lighthouse. So this one is located on Rock Island off the northern tip of Door County, and it's actually Wisconsin's oldest lighthouse, and it was built in 1836. So pretty cool that it's in Door County, which would make sense. So this one is interesting. There are actually people who live in the lighthouse because they give tours.
Really?
So it's kind of like a live-in museum. And guides will live at the lighthouse from Memorial Day through Columbus Day each year, and they give daily tours. So that's something that you can check out if you want to. But this one is probably like the most active as far as paranormal happenings. Visitors have heard voices. They've seen like odd shapes flickering over graves nearby. There's a graveyard near there. And they've also heard unusual noises at like a Native American cemetery nearby. So it seems like there's a lot of activity in and around the lighthouse.
Nice.
So this would creep me out the most. People have actually seen ghosts of small children playing around the graveyard near the lighthouse. So this was where Scandinavian settlers were buried. So might be those people.
Interesting.
But so strange noises are also heard in the lighthouse. Doors will open and close by themselves. Some people might think that it might be the original lighthouse keeper, who his name is David Corbin. His body is actually buried on the island, so maybe he's tied to the building in some way.
Yeah, sure.
There's also a theory that William's wife, Emily, she was a teacher on the island, and she taught a lot of the students at the island school. So some people think that maybe the children could be the school
students?
children, or her students. But she also had 9 children, so
wow,
there could be a variety of children on the island. So
okay,
so that one is a little bit scary for me, but still really cool. John, were you able to visit that one? It was the Potawatomi Lighthouse. Oh, cool. All right. At the end, we will talk about it.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. So we're going to move on to one of my favorite stories from Door County. So this one is about the Shipwrecked Brew Pub and Restaurant. So this is a pub in Egg Harbor, and it has this rich history. It was built back in the 1800s, and it's actually famous for being haunted. So I didn't actually know like how it was haunted. So I did some research, and this is so interesting to me. So people believe that the haunting is tied back to Al Capone.
Oh,
yeah. So he was a Chicago gangster. So he allegedly used to hide out in Egg Harbor from time to time at the Shipwreck restaurant, which is interesting. But it's not actually Al Capone who is haunting the restaurant. They say that it's Al Capone's illegitimate son named Jason.
Oh,
And the
Huh.
story goes that Jason was found hanging in the attic of the original Shipwrecked because he
Ooh.
was scared that, the police were going to come grill him about where his father was.
Sure.
So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's kind of what the stories go. So
Wow.
lots of people have claimed to see his ghost over the years. Like one guy, I don't think it's not just him. I think there's other ghosts as well, because one man reported seeing a child on the roof of the restaurant, and so he calls the police.
And of course.
Yeah, so he's like, there's a kid on the roof, and the police come out, and of course there's nobody on the roof. So that's interesting. So this is where things get weird and a little bit sad. So Shipwrecked actually caught fire in August 2017, and there was like massive damage.
Oh,
and
no.
There's a theory that the fire started in one of the guest bedrooms upstairs. So there's a restaurant on the bottom and then guest rooms on the top. So maybe it was Jason's room, who knows? But the building was like majorly damaged, so they ended up just taking the whole thing down and starting fresh. So it actually, it's like completely renovated nowadays. They got rid of the guest rooms. It's a 2-level restaurant now, but people have actually said that the paranormal occurrences have not stopped, even though the guest rooms and the original building are gone. So maybe that just means, paranormal, entities are tied to the land. Who knows?
Yeah, no, I believe that. That's
so. Yeah, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's a great place to stop.
Yeah,
and looks
really
like
pretty.
They've increased a little bit. Some of your notes say that too.
I haven't been able to find additional accounts, but I think people just have like weird, unexplained stories and occurrences that happen there. So I've been there before. Great food. I did not feel anything paranormal, but there's still time.
That's true.
No children coming up to you, Megan, and being like, "Hello, Megan."
No children on the roof, thankfully.
That would be a little concerning.
Ooh.
Well, if you do see a ghost there, make sure you buy them a round of beer. They've got their own brewery there. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
Oh yeah,
I'm sold.
Don't give ghostly children beer. That's not allowed.
Oh.
Maybe it's Al Capone's family, though. You can do that.
Come on.
Yeah, that's true. I'm sure the Capone children were boozing at a young age.
Probably, to be honest.
You heard it here first.
All right, perfect. I have one last story that I'm going to share with you all today. And John has actually been to this place. So, John, I'd love to hear your insights after I tell it. So this is called the Alexander Noble House. And something interesting about this is that it allegedly has spooky haunted mirrors inside, and I'll tell that story. But the Alexander Noble House is in Fish Creek, and it's one of the oldest remaining residences there. It was built in 1875 by Alexander Noble, and he was one of the town's founders, which is pretty cool. But you can actually visit the house yourself. It's operated by the Gibraltar Historical Association, and many tour visitors have, had some spooky experiences, and some of them are actually really scary. So I'm going to talk about those. But people have seen, apparitions in the house. They've seen floating orbs, and they've even seen faces through the windows.
Ooh.
I don't know about that.
That's my worst nightmare.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to tell some of the craziest, weirdest occurrences that have happened there. So one time this visitor came, it was a young girl, and she took this selfie in one of the mirrors in Noble's bedrooms and found that, in the resulting photo, there was a skeleton face in it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how to explain that, but can you imagine, looking through your photos and it's like, oh my God, it's scary. Yeah. But another thing is, like I said, people have seen faces in the upstairs and downstairs center windows at the house. And some people have claimed they've caught them on camera. Haven't been able to find those, but would be interesting to see if, I could find some of those. But the director of the Gibraltar Historical Association, her name is Lori Buskey. I think I'm saying that right. She believes that the spirits of the house actually like watch over tourists. So I don't think there's ever been anything, like super scary or, violent or anything. But one day, her daughter was actually working at the Noble House. Her name is Katie, and she worked at the house for 2 summers. And she had some like really weird things that happened to her. Like one night, she felt a tug on the back of her skirt, and she said that it kind of felt like a child was tugging on her skirt and trying to get her attention, which is
nice.
interesting. And she's also heard a child crying upstairs and doors opening on their own, which is interesting. And then lastly, in the upstairs mirror at the house, Katie saw a man with a beard standing behind her when she looked in the mirror.
Oh, God. That's
Terrifying.
I hate that.
So scary.
Love that.
And then lastly, while sharing information during a tour about Noble's wife, Emily, who died before the house was built, Katie said that she felt this cold hand patting on her back. She said, as if to console her.
Oh.
So-
well, at least it's being a nice ghost.
So it's
Yeah,
like kind of scary, but kind of comforting in
Mhm.
a weird way. So there's been a lot of activity in the house, but the people who watch over the house, they say nothing's been like truly bad. And Katie, one of the tour guides, she jokes that it's just a family that never wants to move out. Can you blame them?
No.
So those are my stories of Door County. I hope you all enjoyed them. John, I'd love to hear about your experience with the tours. I know there's different ghost tours that you can book, and you can stop at different spots. And it sounds like you've been on them. I haven't yet, so I'd love to hear what you have to say about those.
Yes.
To tell a very sad story today.
You know how it goes.
It'll be really interesting. I'm excited. It's gonna be good.
And I am
Megan,
I'm very excited to hear a very sad story.
Wait, do I need to get my tissues, ladies? Because
You know, maybe just in case.
You'll need
Awesome.
a whole Kleenex box.
Also, on our last podcast, yes, we talked about Zach
We did.
Megan's big story. So
Yeah, we're still waiting for some updates on that whole situation, but we'll keep you guys posted.
So let's get right to it today.
So they knew that there were fires, and that wasn't exactly out of the ordinary. But the townsfolk also knew that a fire was coming, and like normal, they kind of prepared to fight it. So they would fill big barrels full of water, and they would like ready the pumps that they would normally use to fight these sorts of small fires that would pop up around the town. And because of the life that they were used to, with all the forest fires being fairly normal, due to the activity of lumberjacks and farmers and railway workers, they weren't really immediately alarmed. They were like, it's just, typical day in Peshtigo. Let's just get ready to fight this fire.
Yeah. Right.
However, on the evening of Sunday, October 8th, the fire reached Peshtigo, and the survivors described this like insane roaring sound that all of a sudden like came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden everyone heard it. And the flames just burst through the nearby forest, like completely out of nowhere. People weren't expecting this at all. And it was just this like roaring inferno of flames. And it began consuming the town so quickly. According to eyewitnesses, they actually described it at the speed of a railway locomotive is what this, like how this fire blew through town.
Dang.
And so very quickly, the men who were in charge of like these water pumps and water barrels realized that there was no hope in fighting the fire. So everyone started just fleeing. The entire town just started running for their lives, and everything burned. So people were saying like, obviously houses, everything made of wood burned, but also like animals, people's clothes, people's hair. Like one person described seeing a young girl where her hair, like she had very long hair, and it like caught fire, and like her entire head caught on fire.
That would have been crazy.
Yeah, and everything was just like adding fuel to the fire. So like it just kept like building and building and building. And essentially a firestorm was created, which is, I'd heard this term, but I didn't really know what it meant. But a firestorm essentially is a fire that's so hot that it creates its own wind system. So essentially like firestorms can actually burn as hot as 2,000 degrees, which is insane. Yeah. And they can also create what are called like convection columns, which are essentially fire tornadoes. And this likely happened in
Jeez.
Peshtigo because some of the survivors claim that they saw the firestorm like throwing rail cars and houses like into the air, like just stuff just like
Wow.
flying everywhere, as if it was, they kind of described it as like a hurricane.
Yeah, like a tornado
Yeah.
almost.
Mhm,
Yeah.
like a tornado or
That's
hurricane of
crazy.
just fire. Yeah. Which is absolutely
Wow.
insane. I can't even like fathom that.
No.
But as most people, and they kind of knew to do this because, again, they knew a little bit about how these fires went. Most people ran for the Peshtigo River. So there's actually, the Peshtigo River runs right down the middle of town, which is what they would use to move the lumber down. So that river ran through town. So they all tried to run for the river and like get to the other side. Because they didn't think that the fire would cross the river, but it did. It jumped the river pretty easily, ended up burning both sides of the town. So then people just planned on like staying in the water, thinking that that would save them. So according to Reverend Peter Pernin, who he has like the most kind of like long, well-constructed account of what happened. He was a survivor. He has like a lot of firsthand stories. But he said, as a quote, "The flames darted over the river as fast as they did over land. The air was full of them, or rather the air itself was flame. Our heads were constantly in danger." And he said that it was only by like throwing water over their faces and heads constantly and splashing water continually that they were able to keep the flames at bay. And then also some people had like taken stuff from their homes, like quilts and mattresses, to try to like save them. So they were like grabbing the quilts and hiding underneath them, but they had to like completely like submerge them for seconds because otherwise they would like dry up and disintegrate. So they were like pretty much like bobbing in and out of the water just constantly. And actually, if people didn't die from like burning to the fire, a lot of people actually ended up drowning or dying of hypothermia because it was October, so it was pretty cold out. So the river water was actually only 40 degrees.
That's terrible.
Yeah, and I think I have it in my outline somewhere, but they ended up having to stay in the water for about 6 hours. So it was a long period of time. Yeah, to stay in that super cold water. So some people did not even make it, even if they made it to the river. So I wanted to mention a couple personal stories. These are a little dark, but I feel like sometimes it's hard to like empathize really with people who lived so long ago because life was so different that it just seems so like disconnected. So I wanted to mention like some firsthand accounts just to like give a little bit more context for like how people felt during that time. So the first one, this is actually from a sign that's in the cemetery near the Peshtigo Fire Museum. So this is about the Kelly family. So this is like a direct quote. This is what the sign says. So it says, "Terrence Kelly, his wife and 4 children lived in the upper sugar bush. When the fire came with the terrible wind and smoke, the family became separated. Voices could not be heard over the roar of the fire. Mr. Kelly had a child in his arms, as did Mrs. Kelly. The other 2 children clung to each other. In search for safety, each group lost track of the others. The next day, Mr. Kelly and a child were found dead nearly a mile from his farm. The mother and another child were safe. The other children, a boy and a girl who were both 5, were found sleeping in each other's arms near the farm. The house, barn, and all the outbuildings had burned to the ground." So apparently these 2 kids survived, which is kind of crazy.
No. Yeah.
Another survivor, this is Anna Korstad Iverson, and I believe she's actually from like Norway or something, like a Scandinavian country.
Sure.
So she said, "We sat on a raft covered with a feather bed, my mother holding me and my father spilling water over the 3 of us as fast as he could so our clothing would not catch fire. But mother's clothing burned nearly off her back." So
wow.
No. So they actually did end up surviving, she and her parents, which is great. But yeah, it was obviously very traumatic. Wesley Duckett was another survivor. So he said, "When balls of fire started coming down from the sky, my mother and father took us to the spring and wrapped us in wet quilts." Again, these wet quilts like seem to have saved a lot of people, like which is great that people kind of knew what to do. But he also said, "My mother and father were temporarily blind," which we will see come up again. This is a common occurrence as well. "I went to see Mrs. Reinhardt, our neighbor, and I found her dead," he recalled. I liked her a lot, and that really hurt me. Her shawl had not completely burned, so I took the corner that was left and kept it with me for many years.
Aw.
Very, very touching.
Wow. Yeah.
And then this was really interesting too. So this is actually a letter written by Martha Newberry Kuhn to her sister-in-law, Mary. This was written 2 days after the fire, so October 10th. And in her letter, George, she'll talk about George, that is Martha's husband. So the person who's writing it, George is her husband. And then Charlie is her brother. And then Grace is Charlie's wife, so her sister-in-law. So those are the people she's talking about. And then she's writing to her other sister-in-law. So she said, dear, and I clipped out some parts of this. So this isn't 100% what it says, but there's like the most kind of crazy parts. But she said, dear sister, I have bad news to tell. Charlie and his 2 little boys are gone. Oh, what a horrible death. I know. There was a tornado of fire swept over the farming district and the Peshtigo village. It came on us very suddenly. Charlie and his family started to flee. They got about a half mile from home when they went into a little pool of water. Charlie had the 2 children and some things he was trying to save. He passed through the water, thinking to get farther away from the fire. Oh, Mary, it was truly a night of horror. It rained fire. The air was on fire. Some thought the last day had come. Mary, my father, 4 brothers, 2 sisters-in-law, and 5 of their children, 2 of Grace's, and 3 of Brother Walter's passed away. Like all those people in her life. Like, it's insane. She said, dear Mary, we are almost crazy. One can hardly keep one's senses together to write you anything. George went over to see if he could find their bodies. He found Charlie and the children. Charlie and Jesse were lying on their faces, and Frankie was sitting down by a stump with his hands up to his face. Poor little ones. Grace counted 89 dead bodies within the space of a half a mile. Oh, Mary, Grace has no clothes. I either. Our eyes were all burned, but we are better now. George, Eddie, and I were saved by fleeing to the river.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, just crazy. Like, imagine that many people in your family, like, passing away. Like, it was, like, half of her family, at least. Like, 4 of her brothers. Just absolutely insane.
And just really quickly, remember, people didn't have cell phones, the internet, or next day air. So this would take, if you're lucky, maybe close to a month to get
to someone. Yeah.
So imagine if you hear, I don't know, rumors there's a fire, and you're thinking,
like, you don't know.
Oh, well, I don't know if they're alive. And then you get this letter. How devastating would that be? Oh, yeah, it's terrible.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll mention it a little later too, but like their communication systems were like very delayed and down, obviously too. So it probably took even longer than that. It was a very awful situation. So like I mentioned, after 6 hours, the fire had died down. So the people who were in the water were able to come out. Yeah, 6 hours. God, that's a long time. And it was like the evening too. So it was kind of like the middle of the night, I believe, when everything had died down. So the only people who ended up surviving were the people who made it to the river and who didn't, die of other causes, or to a marshy area that was located at the south of the town. In other areas too, something kind of interesting is some people actually survived by taking like quote unquote shelter in fully plowed farm fields, because then if they were out of the trees, the fire couldn't really like pass by it, which is really interesting. But yeah, so altogether, in the aftermath, the fire consumed approximately 1.5 million acres, or 1,875 square miles, and ended an estimated of 1,200 to 2,400 lives.
Wow.
Absolutely insane. Including 800 just in the town of Peshtigo, but the fire also consumed an estimated 16 other small villages and communities kind of in the vicinity. So they think, I think there's a sign in Peshtigo that says like 1,700 is their best like guess, but it definitely could be more. It's hard for them to tell. So the fire decimated every building in Peshtigo and beyond. It melted metal. Some said it turned sand into glass.
Wow, that'd be really hot.
Yeah,
that's really hot.
Insanely hot. Yeah. And obviously like animals and livestock and all of their food supply were completely wiped out. And the exact number of lives, it's actually interesting. It's unknown because the fire itself destroyed the town records and burnt. So like, they didn't have the records of everyone who was living there. So they kind of had to guess. And also it burnt people so badly that some bodies were never recovered. In fact, I looked this up. So like a cremation oven, the normal temperature that it would reach would be 1800 to 2000 degrees. So it's definitely possible that some people were like completely incinerated in the firestorm, because the firestorm can also get up to 2000 degrees. So sometimes it's like so gruesome and like dark to think about, but there were people who said that at times they didn't know if like something was a body, other than the fact that like there would be like a melted belt buckle or like a watch. And that was like the only way they would even know if it had been like a human, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah. Yes, it is. And then there were tons of like unidentified remains too. So they actually took the remains of around 350 residents and buried them in a mass grave at the Peshtigo Fire Cemetery. So there, if you go to Peshtigo, you will see like there is a mass grave there with 350 people buried there. It was also mentioned that so many people were unidentified because either they were burned so badly, but if they weren't, there might have been no one left alive who would recognize them, which is so sad to think about. Yeah, like
it's worse.
I know. I'm like, it's just insane. Like it's crazy. I don't know. I might have these details later, but I looked it up, and it's actually more people died in this fire than in like Hurricane Katrina, for instance. And you think about the fact that it was which I had like, it took me reading that to really like understand like the insane level of devastation, and the fact that like, you know, New Orleans is a huge city, so obviously this is massively devastating, but a much smaller percentage of the community died, whereas with Peshtigo it was a small town to begin with, and like over half the people who live there passed away. Like it's just insane to think about. But yeah, like I mentioned before, because the communication systems were completely wiped out, it took like days to get the help that the town needed. So survivors in a lot of cases had to actually walk on foot to towns that were miles away to tell them what had happened and that they needed help. So Marinette, Wisconsin was actually one of the first towns to respond. So they were not affected by the fire. So they sent clothing and food for the survivors. So that was great. And then they kind of word spread from there. But the news of the fire was very heavily overshadowed by the Great Chicago Fire, because like I said, it was the same day. So like people didn't even know about the Peshtigo Fire for days, because they learned about Chicago pretty much right as it was happening, because there's so many people there, word travels a lot faster. So like days later, finally, when it was understood that many more people had died in Peshtigo, some of the train cars that were actually on their way to help Chicago were rerouted to Peshtigo.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so that was good, but it was like days late. So
you
know, it was kind of like, oh, thanks guys. Like,
thanks for nothing.
Like literally what, like, I don't know, like 6-7 times the number of people died in Peshtigo. It's crazy. So yeah, like I said, very few people have actually heard of this fire at all. Even as someone who was born and raised in Wisconsin, like I had heard the name, the Peshtigo Fire, like I knew it was a thing, but I had no idea like what the cost was or anything like that until my dad told me. He was like, did you know that the deadliest fire in U.S. history happened in Wisconsin? And I was like, that can't be true. But sure enough, I
have to be honest, I knew about the fire too, but since it's Chicago, because they're a bunch of fibs, they have to get top billing, even though, you know, what you're talking about, I've kind of read about it, and I'm like, are you kidding me? And they just wiped out an entire town.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, multiple towns, really. And it's kind of sad, because it feels like almost like the property loss is more important to people than the actual lives, which is kind of,
that's insane to me.
Yeah, like obviously the Chicago fire was still really bad. It displaced, you know, like 100,000 people, but most people still survived, at least. So
yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so something else I wanted to mention, because I learned about this and I was like, what the actual hell, honestly. So we talked about, WTF. I literally have it in my outline as WTF is going on. We just talked about the Peshtigo fire. We mentioned the Great Chicago Fire. But what if I told you there were even more fires occurring in the Midwest on that day? Yeah, same day.
What
October
is
8th,
up with October
1871.
8th?
I know.
This is a
I literally
bummer podcast.
I know, but it's so crazy. I was looking up like what astrological things are happening on this day. I don't know enough about astrology to really give any insight into that. But I was just like, what could possibly be happening? Because there were 2 other fires in Michigan actually on that same day. So there was the Port Huron fire, which started on October 8th in Michigan, which was one of a series of fires known as the Great Michigan Fire, and burned multiple cities, including White Rock and Port Huron, and much of the countryside that's in like the Thumb region of Michigan. In total, another like 1.2 million acres burned. So a huge fire.
Yeah.
In that one, I believe only like 50 people died. So still like, that's still a lot of people.
Yeah.
But then on the same day in Michigan, another fire burned the cities of Holland and Manistee, Michigan. Megan and I were actually just there like 2 days ago.
Yes, we were.
But in total, in those fires, about 250 people died.
Wow.
And in these fires in Michigan. So that means like in absolute total, at least 2,000 people died to various forest fires in the Midwest, just in this like 2-day span of time. But it was likely closer to 3,000, possibly even more.
Wow.
So it's just crazy. Like it's just crazy to me how that all happened on the same day. But so I wanted to do a lot of digging into how this even happened, because it was just so bizarre to me. That's why that's where the weather.gov website comes in.
weather.gov.
Yeah, so they have a lot of good information about this. So the actual cause of many of these fires is not really known. So people claim everything from like meteor strikes to lightning storms to, in the Great Chicago Fires case, people say a cow kicked over a lantern, which is not necessarily true. Most people do not actually think this is true. It's just like the pop culture accepted whatever. But realistically, like when weather conditions are the way that they were, like anything could have caused it. So what we do know is that the weather conditions across the region during the summer and fall of 1871 were incredibly dry. So circumstances were very conducive to large and fast spreading fires. And again, people just weren't used to that. So they didn't really take precautions. In fact, records show that there hadn't been a like significant rainstorm in the area, really in all the Midwest since like mid-July of 1871.
So it was
again,
dry.
this was October. So yeah, it was months of like barely any rain. And there was no rainfall at all in Peshtigo for 11 weeks, which is again, very unusual for the time. So things were very, very dry. Also, logging and clearing of land for agriculture and local industry contributed to the fast spread of the fire, because people, they just like discarded the timber kind of without caution. So there was just like, dead trees everywhere that they had, been logging and everything that they weren't discarding of properly. And then there was also a general ignorance and indifference toward the population of like the Peshtigo area specifically and Michigan, which contributed to a lack of prompt emergency services. But I mean, either way, I think, even with proper emergency services, like at the point that the fire had gotten to, I don't think there was any stopping it. But but in addition, and this I think is like the key to why it was like this day in particular. So there was a strong autumn storm system occurring in the area on October 8th specifically, due to like a colliding hot and cold front from the north and south. And there was like a 40-degree difference in temperature variation. So this produced very strong southwesterly, quote unquote, hurricane force winds across the Central Plains. They said that there were like 100-mile-an-hour winds, like pretty much across this entire area, which is crazy. Yeah, so the winds combined with the dryness really led to any small fires, which were fairly normal, being very quickly and easily turned into larger fires and spreading very rapidly. So normally, like there would be small fires popping up fairly frequently, but this day specifically, it was like, no, if there's a small fire, it's going to become a gigantic fire. So October 8th was specifically very windy. It's still strange that it all happened on the exact same day. Like it's strange no matter what. But but luckily the fires of these days across the Midwest were a huge wake-up call that led to a ton of changes in how we prevent forest fires to this day. So like properly discarding of wood that's not going to be used. They're not burning stumps and branches in the woods anymore.
Yeah.
And just like taking extra precautions when it's a specifically dry year, things like that, and having more. Obviously, now we have communication systems, so people know when things are coming as well.
Yeah.
So like likely nothing like this will ever happen again.
I hope not. Don't tell California that.
I know. Yeah. Well, it was crazy to me too that with all the California fires, that still this one in Wisconsin was the most deadly. Like, just kind of insane. But
so what's really interesting about all of this is it was really hard to get a grasp on everything, right? Because this was so long ago, but so devastating and destroyed so much and everything. And the closest we can is like to California. So my father-in-law lived in California when some of the biggest fires were happening. And this is like how silly we are nowadays. So it went to LA. And of course, people in LA can't have smoke. So everyone just stayed inside and they closed everything down. And everybody was like, look at that big fire and it's ruining our lives. Somebody should do something about it. And then it keeps happening again. And you can, if you want just a brief glimpse into what this might kind of be like, go on YouTube and Google fires and like people driving through them.
Oh my gosh, those are crazy videos.
Just crazy. Imagine you're a person and you have your two little kids and your grandpa and grandma and whatever, right? And you're trying to get through that. So again, I highly recommend do that to give a really good sense of what Brooke is talking about here, and you'd be like, no, thank you. Let's give money to the fire department so they can fight these things, right? So,
exactly.
My goodness.
It's just absolutely insane. Another crazy thing, and I didn't write this in my outline, so I don't have like specifics, but I read it briefly somewhere. I read that in World War II, they actually did a bunch of research into the Peshtigo fire and trying to understand the exact conditions and how it happened. Not to like prevent it, which I mean they did separately, but because they were trying to like use it as like a form of warfare, like these crazy fires, which was very, again, dark to me. Because imagine like, I mean, I know it was World War II, it was different times, but like imagine purposefully inflicting that kind of turmoil and pain on like another population of people. Like that'd be absolutely
awful.
Insane to me. I don't know if they ever did it, but
yes. So being a big history guy as I am, I can add just one really quick. So the soldiers would have flamethrowers, and what they would do is they would go up to the bunkers of these German or Japanese and they would just light it up. And here's the two things that happen. One, it sucks all the oxygen out of the room. So now you can't breathe. Oh, by the way, you're on fire too. So you run out, and this special type of what they developed, kind of like a napalm, which would cling to your skin so you couldn't wash it off. And if you did try to wash it off, it would get worse.
Yeah. Ugh,
and then they would also do it in tanks where someone would jump on top of a tank, light it up, suck all the oxygen out of there. The guys would run out. They can't breathe. They're on fire. Then they would shoot them. So, you know,
that's crazy.
Human society, for taking something so tragic and making it worse.
Right? Literally. That's what we're best at, though, right?
Yeah, we're good at that.
God, just insane. But yeah, so very bad.
But we love hauntings.
So I did, I couldn't not put this in there. I wanted to focus mostly on like the story and the, all the personal stories, but there is some interesting paranormal intrigue about this whole situation. So today, this is according to Wisconsin Frights, but I see this pop up a lot. But visitors of Peshtigo report hearing like ghostly voices and seeing apparitions kind of all around the town, but especially in the museum, and they smell smoke while at the museum. And one person even reported having seen the museum engulfed in phantom flames.
Oh, wow.
And it's actually interesting because I was going to mention this a little later, but the museum itself is actually in the exact spot where a church was that burned down during the fire, and they like rebuilt it, and then it like burned down again. I'll mention this later because I want to get the details right. But
Sure.
But yeah, so the museum itself, it would kind of make sense, the Phantom Flames thing, because it was, right where a building had previously burned 2 times, it turns out. So yeah, it's definitely, I couldn't find like super specific stories, but it seems like kind of just normal occurrences that people have in the city of Peshtigo, and it kind of makes sense. I think about how awful it was. But this was a little out there. According to Wisconsinology, witnesses to the fire from back in the 1800s, from Outagamie, Brown, and Manitowoc, reportedly witnessed a demon boy riding a black stag with massive horns spreading fire as he rode the countryside.
That is the coolest thing ever. I want to see that.
The Wisconsin demon boy.
Can you imagine?
Riding a black stag. That is so metal. I'm just going to... Somebody make a picture of this. Send it to Dairyland Frights at gmail.com. I will pay you.
Right? It sounds pretty crazy. Sounds like a metal album cover for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then this one was really weird to me. So this actually came from Father Pernin, who provided like a ton of eyewitness accounts from the fire itself. So he said survivors were apparently reporting seeing a black object similar to a balloon in the sky on the day of the fire, rapidly revolving in the air and streaming rivulets of fire in all directions. And it was like moving toward a house. Yeah. Which it seemed to, according to him, it seemed to single this one house out for destruction. Okay. And then the balloon like burst, according to Father Pernin, which is kind of insane. But at the same time, I'm like, well, what they were probably seeing was one of those like fire tornadoes.
Correct.
Yeah. And like, they were maybe like kind of, I don't know, maybe the top of the tornado looked like some kind of black object, because that's what it kind of sounds like to me. But just like the the description of it, I was like, what? Like, that's insane. But
wow.
But yeah, I'm sure like in the chaos of everything, people were just kind of seeing crazy things. I'm sure. So yeah, so there's just a couple paranormal intriguing things about the story, but wanted to talk a little bit about Peshtigo today, because it has the lumber industry was never able to make a comeback, which makes sense. Because there were not really any trees left. And as we know, actually, even the white pines in general are not as prominent in Wisconsin anymore, because they were so like over chopped, overfelled back in the day. But Peshtigo did rebuild and is now known by some as the city rebuilt from ash, which is cool. The current population is about 3,400 people as of the 2020 census, and it's about 3 square miles is the area of the city. So it's cool. They're back and they're doing their thing. And then there is also the Peshtigo Fire Museum. So I really want to go to this. It looks pretty cool. It's not a huge museum by any means, but it's it has a lot of like artifacts and, again, firsthand accounts. And it's right next to the cemetery too, where they buried those 350 people in a mass grave. So the museum is located actually on the site where the St. Mary's Catholic Church stood before the fire. And then oddly, after the fire, a new church was built across the river for the people of Peshtigo. And then they, after that, built a second Catholic church on the St. Mary's site. But that church actually burned down again in 1927 and was rebuilt somewhere else. So the new church that was across the river moved back to the St. Mary's site. and that structure was converted to the museum in 1963. So a little convoluted, but but kind of interesting. So that museum is right where one of the buildings that burned was located. Another thing is the Peshtigo Fire Museum is actually on the National Register of Historic Places, which is cool. They host storytelling sessions, exhibits of artifacts from the fire, displays of lifestyle at the time in 1871. And the Peshtigo Fire Cemetery, where the mass grave is right next to the museum. And there's actually a memorial marker there that was constructed by the town in 1951. And it was actually the first official state historical marker in the state of Wisconsin, which is kind of cool.
That's cool.
Nice.
Yeah. And then one of the more interesting things that they have at the museum is actually an unblemished church tabernacle, which Father Peter Pernin saved by submerging it in the Peshtigo River as he was fleeing. Yeah, so it's like completely like, in good condition still. So that's kind of interesting. And the museum also includes displays of several letters with first-person accounts of the fire and the cleanup. And in one of the letters, a survivor describes burying 900 to 1,000 people.
Oh,
crazy!
So sad.
Can't even imagine being like the people in charge of that cleanup. But if you would like to visit the museum, it is apparently it's open every day from Memorial Day until October 8th each year, fittingly. So October 8th is the last day that it's open each year. But so it's not open yet, but it will open in May, I guess, and then it'll be open every day for a couple months. So yeah, very interesting,
very cool, very sad.
But
it's
very sad. Yeah,
learn about,
but it's
Well, this is a bummer episode,
but hopefully we learned something. And again, we will likely never see anything as deadly. Well, a forest fire as deadly as this. It was actually the top 5 of most deadly natural disasters in the U.S. history. Crazy.
Even
I think
hurricanes.
Witnesses would see a ghostly phantom of a woman walking around the grounds. But at the time that they started saying this, Robert did not believe them. However, one night in the mid-1930s, while he and his wife were eating dessert in the kitchen, they heard the door to the basement opening and kind of like shaking. Very spooky.
That's what they heard.
Yeah, that's what they heard. That's for sure what they heard. So Robert, wanting to protect his family because he has his 3 kids there too, remember? He grabbed a gun and he headed to the door where he, according to legend, saw someone and took 2 shots, and then the person disappeared. So he shot at a ghost. And interestingly, these bullet holes were supposedly found later on after the Lamonts moved out. So they thought that this was like a solid story. I did actually find 2 photos of the supposed bullet holes taken by a member of the Wausau Paranormal Research Society in 1987. But I couldn't find any other photos of these alleged bullet holes. And even the pictures on the Wausau Paranormal Research Society website were like it was like, maybe that could be bullet holes, but it also could have been someone like stabbing the door with a screwdriver. Like, this is much later. So I think the wood was very, not very intact anymore. So I don't know. It's like, it could be bullet holes, but also I don't know if we can really clarify that. But after this incident, again, according to the legend, the Lamonts supposedly fled the house pretty much immediately and they never returned. However, I want to say I could not find anything regarding, first of all, when this happened. So most sources say the mid-1930s. There's nothing even remotely like exact. Like there is no like specific date or even year that can be attributed to this incident happening. Yeah. And I'm questioning, and I think Megan might talk about this guy, but Carl is actually the brother of someone who owned the mansion a little later on. I think it's Ginger Hinshaw. So her brother Carl actually claimed that he, while he was visiting, smelled gunpowder and went downstairs and actually saw like a ghost apparition of Mr. Lamont shooting at nothing. Nice. Yeah. So he said that this happened and then he saw the bullet holes. So that's what he assumed had transpired. But I don't know if like that's where the original story came from, and no one ever really, because I couldn't find anything about Robert Lamont ever having like publicly said that he had seen a ghost, any information that they had for sure fled the building. And I even looked into like the 3 kids to see if they had ever made any statement about the mansion being haunted, but I couldn't find anything from any of the 3 of them either. So it's really interesting. It seemed like this whole story about the Lamont's family it wasn't really public knowledge until after Carl had like talked about it, which I just thought was kind of interesting.
So I have a quick theory. This is the way my mind works. You know how people in the 1900s were all pale and stuff like that, and wear these creepy long night gowns and everything like that?
Yeah.
Imagine if it was like Cousin Billy.
Oh no!
Right?
And he's all pale and everything. He didn't tell them they were coming, or they didn't know he was there because it's a huge mansion. And Lamont just shot him.
Right? And then he covered it up by saying, "Oh, it was a ghost."
Right? Since there's
My
no
bad.
what you're seeing, there's no evidence. There's no like, there's not really anything you can point to, like, oh, someone died during construction.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's the thing too, is it's like, why was this place even haunted? Because there wasn't
Exactly.
It wasn't built on any kind of like, Native American burial grounds or anything like they sometimes say. There was no one who died there.
Yeah.
So I later on, again, I think Megan might talk about this too, so I don't want to talk too much about it, but I think the claim was that Jeremy Carver, I think it's Jeremy, like an old explorer, was actually haunting the building because he apparently had claim to the land. Like there was a deed saying that he should have owned this land. Sure. And that existed somewhere in Summerwind in some kind of black box, and he haunted the mansion because he was mad that he didn't have access to this land or whatever. But yeah, even that, well, we can talk about it later, but supposedly Jeremy Carver actually never explored that far north in Wisconsin, and also he wasn't even buried in the United States at all. So why would his ghost be there?
But a little suspicious.
Yeah, a little odd. Yeah. One other thing, I thought this was funny. So that blog that I was talking about, this is a quote from that person who did tons of research on the mansion over time, and they specifically said in the blog, "I'm having a great difficulty finding anything related to the mansion during the period from 1916 to 1930 or so. I would like to find a source which mentions the quote-unquote kitchen shooting, as I can't understand where this information has originated from."
Right.
And I was like, yeah, same. I also cannot find anything. So kind of interesting. But moving on, the mansion apparently laid vacant for a long time after the Lamonts supposedly fled the property. So the Lamonts, according to most sources, say they owned the property until 1948 when Robert Lamont actually passed away, and that they hadn't entered it again for pretty much like 2 decades.
Oh gosh.
Wow.
Yeah, so like from the 1930 to 1950-ish, it pretty much no one was there. But something that I thought was interesting was that so that's like the kind of story again that you see in everything, like Haunted Wisconsin books, haunted this, haunted that. But when I read an article from the Milwaukee Journal in 1985, again, this was from that blog, and this was a published news article, they had actually interviewed this woman named Caroline Ashby, who was from the Land O'Lakes area, and she said that her family actually owned the mansion just before World War II, so the early 40s, and that she stayed there as a kid, and at the time, no one actually considered the mansion haunted. And at that time, the mansion was already in disrepair and infested with bats, according to her. So
that's sad.
It's sad that it kind of like went, kind of became so dilapidated so quickly. But also interesting that like, apparently, most people think that the Lamonts owned it until 1948, but apparently there was a whole other family living there for a couple of years that no one even really knew about or no one talks about. Another person in the same article named Jerry E. Sparks, he said that he actually lived there with his dad, who was the caretaker for the mansion in the 1930s. And they lived in the kind of the side house for the servants and caretakers. And he also said that he didn't remember the mansion being haunted or anyone talking about the mansion being haunted either. Another resident, Gene Newth, so this is more recent as well, he said that people started saying the mansion was haunted only after it was abandoned, and no one said that while it was occupied. So one thing I'll say, I just wanted to throw this in there, but this place had so many friggin' owners. Like people would apparently put a down payment down and then they would just ditch it. And even as late as 1985, people like didn't know who actually owned it, and they were like, hey, we want to burn this place down, but like who even owns this property? They had to like track down the people. So it was really interesting just how much this place was kind of passed around. So I think that kind of like lends itself to the haunted thing too, is people didn't want to keep it, they didn't want to stay there. But eventually, in 1948, Summerwind was purchased and kept by Lillian Kiefer and her husband. So they had the mansion kind of in there, or they owned it for a long time. They never lived there on a permanent basis, which a lot of people kind of say was more evidence to it being haunted. But knowing that in the early 1940s, it was already infested with bats, I'm kind of like, I understand why they wouldn't want to live there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some reports say that Miss Kiefer said she never felt safe at the property, so she left the mansion and left all of her belongings there, telling neighbors that they could take whatever they wanted, but that she wouldn't be held responsible if something bad happened to them. Kind of interesting.
Right.
Yeah. And then that same article from earlier also did mention one neighbor who did kind of have a paranormal experience. So when she was visiting Mrs. Kiefer right after they had purchased the mansion, she said she saw a big army overcoat laying on a bed. And then later, like an hour later, she passed by the same room and it was just her and Mrs. Kiefer, and Mrs. Kiefer hadn't been in there, that the coat had actually disappeared, and it freaked her out enough that she never went back. Wow. So she did have kind of a weird experience there.
Yeah.
So anyway, after Mr. Kiefer died, Mrs. Kiefer actually divided the land up and sold everything. So remember, it was 80 acres of land. So
wow,
they sold a bunch of different lots, and the land, I guess, that had Summerwind on it kept being diverted back to Mrs. Kiefer because people couldn't keep up with the payments. So that's kind of why another reason why it got tossed around a lot. But it eventually did get purchased, though, by the Hinshaw family. And now I will pass it off to Megan, who's going to talk about that.
All right. Thanks, Brooke.
Yeah. That was really super interesting. And I'm still going with my cousin Billy's story that killed him.
Yeah.
And they left.
I think that's reasonable.
Okay. All right. Megan.
All right.
I'd love to hear your part now.
Sounds good. All right. In 1969, the Hinshaw family actually purchased Summerwind. So they're the next family that owned it. And they only stayed there for 6 months, which is an extremely short period of time. But I do understand why they ended up leaving, because they experienced some of the craziest, most intense paranormal activity that has ever really been reported in the mansion. And I'm going to talk about that today.
Nice.
So in this family, there were 8 people. There was Arnold, the father, Ginger, the mother, and then they had 6 children. So you would think this is like the perfect place to raise a nice big family. No, I'll go over that. It was a complete nightmare for them. Even when they moved in, like immediately there were red flags. Like when Ginger first saw the mansion, the first thing that she said when she saw it was, "I feel in love with this house in the most awful way." Isn't that such like an interesting thing to say?
Yeah. That is an interesting thing to say.
Yeah, even she had like weird vibes about it before she even really moved in. And even after the family moved in, they started experiencing these really crazy, unexplained paranormal happenings. So all the members of the family started seeing these vague shapes. They saw shadows, they saw full body apparitions. And the most spooky of those apparitions was this one woman who would float back and forth between the French doors by their dining room. Another weird thing that happened was they would report that they would smell perfume in the air.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, just out of nowhere. Maybe it was the perfume of that woman who was floating back and forth on the French door.
That does happen.
Maybe.
That does happen. That is reported.
Yeah. And another interesting thing I read is that they would hear these mumbled voices going on, but when they would walk in the room to see what was happening, the voices would just stop. It's like very interesting.
Yeah.
Another thing they reported is that the lights would go on and off by themselves. So they must have had electricity at that time. So it'd be interesting to research when the house did get electricity. But another super interesting thing that I learned is that some of the rooms in the house would feel freezing, even in the summer. And for people who are familiar with Wisconsin summers do get pretty hot. Yes. So having, ice cold rooms is very odd.
Very odd.
So of course the family, they wanted this to be their dream house, and they thought, maybe we're just imagining things, but more things started to happen, like appliances would break down, and then they'd call a repair person, but then it would magically repair itself before the service person came.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, windows and doors were opening and closing by themselves. And one time, this one window, it kept opening and closing, and it was driving Arnold, the father, completely nuts. So he took this heavy nail and he nailed it into the window and shut it because he's like, we're done with this. So he nailed it shut, and it finally stayed closed. But there's just that one window that would open by itself, and it was driving him nuts. So the Hinshaws, they were super determined to make this historical house work for them, despite all these strange things occurring. And I mean, this was their dream house. They wanted to make it work and raise their family in it. But what they really struggled with was they tried to hire workers to come in and fix up the place, but nobody would stay and work on the house. People would just straight refuse to work on it, which is interesting. Like renovators would just leave halfway through the projects, and some of them claimed, we just won't work on this house. There's too many bizarre things going on. And some of them even went so far as to fake being sick so that they wouldn't have to show up to work.
I'm sick, I can't make it.
Yeah, they were desperate not to work on the house. So finally the Hinshaws were like, screw it. We're just going to do this housework ourselves. We don't have to hire anybody.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah. But this is one of the craziest stories that I was able to find from Summerwind. One day, Arnold was painting this closet in one of the bedrooms. And in the closet, there was this large shoe drawer that was installed in the back of the closet. And Arnold decided, I'm going to pull it out so that I can paint behind it. But when he pulled it out, he saw that there was this dark space behind the drawer. So he was like, what was this? Didn't see it before. Right? He had to go investigate it. So he has his wife, Ginger, bring him a flashlight, and he takes a look. And the second he looks in there, he jumps. And he's completely disgusted because he sees something furry in there. And he thought maybe an animal had gotten in and died. But he couldn't quite see what it was. He was just too big to squeeze into the space.
Yeah, no kidding.
So what any dad would do, he recruits his daughter, Mary,
to
go in. He's like, get the daughter to do it. Who
honey,
knows what it is?
Come here, honey.
So they tell the daughter, all right, come here and we'll take a look at what's inside the closet. So Mary, the daughter, she grabs the flashlight and she crawls inside this little dark space. But moments later, she lets out this big scream. And she found what the legend says appeared to be a human corpse. What Mary pulled out of the closet was what she says appeared to be a human skull with black hair still on it.
Oh.
Very suspicious.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you two about is the Hinshaw family never called the police about this supposed skull that they found, which is a little bit suspicious. So why they never called the authorities, not sure why. Was the story concocted to fit, those scary stories of Summerwind, or was this a real body that was the result of a crime that took place?
Yeah, that's interesting too. That the mansion was pretty much not used, or it was pretty much vacant for decades before they moved there. So it's like, if it was behind a wall, wouldn't it have happened during the construction? Which I don't know. It's just the timing of it is a little odd, because I feel like if the skull has hair still connected to it, that implies that it's kind of more recent, because otherwise it would have all deteriorated. So I don't know if I buy it.
So one thing, I don't know if you hear any news stories about this, but some people will try to break into homes, or they'll do like a Santa Claus and they'll try to go through the chimney and get stuck.
Right.
I don't know if that's
I have heard about that.
But some people will try to go through the walls to get in because they don't want to be seen because they're robbing the place. So
that's true.
What's weird though, you're exactly right, Megan. Why wouldn't they call the police? Because I'd be like, hey, I don't want you guys, someone buys this house and then they find the body or whatever, we hide it, and then people think we did it. No,
that's right. That's one thing that occurred to me. If you find this corpse in the house, it's like, all these haunted happenings have been happening. Maybe we should put this corpse to rest and bury it in the ground. Maybe that would have fixed things. So
hey, just a side note, when was this? This was the 80s or 60s?
This was the 60s.
Okay,
or
so
it was the 70s, pardon me.
Oh, 70s. Yeah. So they still didn't have any DNA evidence that they could take this thing and, you know what I'm saying? Like in modern day where you could do a DNA and then be like, oh, hey, it's, whoever, or, we found this person. Yeah. But it's still, why wouldn't you call the police? That makes no sense.
Yeah, that is odd.
I'll also talk about this later. They go back and they check to see if it's still there. And I'll tell you what happens later on. But it's just interesting that they saw the corpse and they just put it right back in. And they're like, out of sight, out of mind.
Hey, Hey, honey, just put that right back in there. Good. Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about it. Good night, hon. Sweet dreams.
Actually, John, this is where things start to get a lot crazier because after they found this supposed skull in the closet, things just took a turn for the worst. Quite frankly, Arnold, the father, he just completely lost his shit. He started staying up late at night, and he was playing this Hammond organ that the couple had purchased before moving into the house. And now, if you take a step back, playing the organ and the piano was something that he really loved doing. He used to play it, for fun. Yes. Love it, John. But this time, just like that music recording, his music was completely frenzied and he'd play it really loud throughout the night. So mind you, he's staying up all night, playing the organ, not letting anybody sleep. And, this is disturbing Ginger, his wife. She's begging him to stop. Please come to bed.
Yeah.
But
right.
The interesting thing is Arnold told Ginger, if I stop playing, something bad is going to happen. The demons in my head are telling me to keep playing. That's why I have to keep playing. And she's completely frightened that he's just going off the rails. Sometimes Ginger would get all of the children together in a single room and they all sleep together because they're completely afraid of their deranged father staying up all night, playing the organ long into the night.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
That's crazy. Oof.
Yeah, Arnold, he suffered a complete mental breakdown. He's getting angry, he's withdrawn, he's emotionless, he stops showing up to his job. So he eventually loses his job. He's not paying the bills. He's sleeping all day. He's staying up playing the organ all night. It just was completely out of control.
Wow.
And there was this one interesting story that I found. He's completely off the rails. And one day he was under the impression that one of his daughters had hidden his hammer when they didn't. And so what he did in his mind, he's like, okay, how we're going to fix this? He went out and he found the daughter's pet raccoon and he killed it as a punishment.
Oh.
And that's so mean.
Yeah. What I found is he did it to quote, quote, prove a point. That's what he said.
Prove a point.
Really sad. So
Where's Dad at?
Yeah, you can see why Ginger, she's like completely beside herself. Some accounts even say that she even contemplated committing suicide in the Summerwind mansion. So the stress was just too much for her. And so she ended up sending Arnold away for treatment, which is probably the best thing for him.
The best thing, yeah.
Yeah, Ginger and the children, they ended up moving to Granton, Wisconsin with Ginger's parents. So Ginger and Arnold did end up getting a divorce, and Ginger remarried to a man named George, who will come into the story later.
Okay.
Interesting.
So Ginger, she's completely terrified of this house. They don't live there anymore. But a few years later, Ginger's father, his name is Raymond von Bobber. I believe that's how you say his name.
I love that name.
Von Bobber, yes.
Von Bobber.
So Ginger's father, he announces his plans. I'm going to turn Summerwind into a bed and breakfast. I'm going to breathe new life into it. Like, that makes sense. It's completely haunted. But let's make it into attraction, right?
Yeah.
So he thought that this mansion would attract guests to its super scenic location and they'd love it and it would be a great business opportunity. And keep in mind, at this time, he had no idea that Ginger and her family had been completely terrified in this house. Yeah. So he's like, yeah, let's buy it. Let's renovate it.
What the heck?
Ginger is begging him, please don't buy Summerwind. It's not worth it. Don't do it. But Raymond, he does it anyways. You know,
of course.
He even acknowledged, like, okay, yeah, maybe this place is haunted. I don't really care. So he actually, like Brooke mentioned earlier, he claimed that he thought that he knew who the identity of the ghost haunting the place was, and it was a man named Jonathan Carver.
Jonathan Carver.
Yes.
I said Jeremy earlier.
Jonathan Carver. He's an 18th century British explorer, and Raymond claimed that he might have been haunting Summerwind because he was looking for some sort of deed that was hidden within the house. So that was his theory, and he even wrote a book on it. It's called The Carver Effect, which came out in 1979. And I actually went on Amazon to see if I could find it. And there is a hardcover selling for $300, and it's very difficult to find. So
I saw that. That's crazy.
Right.
Yeah, it is not currently in print, so it's really hard to find. But the funny thing is that he wrote this book, and none of the locals took him seriously. They thought that this was some like shit he was making up to, make money off of. So, like Brooke was saying, it's like some stories in this whole thing is like there's some stretching of truth and people not believing, and it's kind of up to you to decide what you believe.
Exactly.
One other thing too that I read about this period of time and why the locals didn't believe him was that the Von Bobers or whatever, like Raymond and his wife, never even like went into the mansion. They lived like in a camper on the premises, but they didn't like go into it at all. So they were like, how would he even know that this place is like supposedly haunted?
Right.
Like he just kind of seemed like he was making it up for clout a little bit.
It's interesting. So again, a lot of these stories are just alleged accounts. So anyways, so Raymond decides he's going to buy Summerwind, and one day his son Carl, his daughter Ginger, and Ginger's new husband George, they all went exploring the house. And George actually spots that same closet that I was talking about, allegedly with the skull in it. And so Carl climbs into the space and he takes a look around, and it's empty. It's like, what happened here? It's like, was the skull ever real? Was it removed? Was it removed by a person? Was it never there at all? So it's not quite sure what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, if you think someone would remove it, I don't know, maybe
interesting.
You know what would be super creepy if the dad came back and like, grabbed it out of there, like,
It'd be crazy.
Again, that's just too weird. Like, if Arnold just said, hey, I gotta get that out of there, and went back and got it, and then it's like my bunk bed from hell. Where's the body?
Never know. Never found out who it was, if it even existed.
That's freaky.
Right.
Oh man, I love it.
Anyways, so the plans to turn this mansion into a bed and breakfast, you can guess it, did not go very smoothly. Work did not stay on the job. They were complaining that their tools were going missing. They thought they were being watched. And the funny thing is that Marie, who's Raymond's wife, also agreed with their complaints. And she's like, I can't be in this house. Like, I feel like I'm being followed everywhere I go. So everyone's just completely uncomfortable in this house. So you can kind of sense this reoccurring theme going on. But one of the disturbances that I thought was the most crazy out of all of the stories that I've read is that apparently the rooms in the house would change sizes. So it was impossible to measure them.
Wow.
Because the construction crews would measure them, and then the next day they'd be a completely different size. Like this one point, Raymond estimated that he could put a restaurant within Summerwind that would seat 150 people. But then when he compared it to the original blueprints of Summerwind, he realized that the same space would only fit half as many people. So not sure what is occurring with that, but the changing of the room sizes, it drove the construction crews crazy. They didn't want to work on it. It was too much work to keep remeasuring. Another interesting thing I found is that they would take photographs of the house with the same camera, only a few seconds apart, and there would be variations between the photos, which is interesting. Like one time, Raymond took a photo of the living room and compared it with one that Ginger had taken when they lived there. In Ginger's photo, it showed these curtains that were hanging up on the windows, and she had taken them down when they moved out. But Raymond's photo, years later, showed the same curtains in that photo, even though they weren't hung up. So it's like, how is that possible?
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
So all these things are going on, and this is funny, but Life magazine gets wind of the story. Haha. Funny pun there.
Hard pun.
Life magazine finds out about Summerwind, and the mansion actually makes the top 9 most haunted locations in the US. They write an article about it. And as you can imagine, the feature got a ton of attention. And it wasn't long where people were, flocking to the house. They wanted to check it out, thrill seekers and teenagers wanting to throw parties in there. And the increased traffic that came to the property just completely put Summerwind into ruin, because no one was really living there, maintaining it. And that's kind of the start of the demise to the whole building.
Right.
That is amazing, Brooke and Megan. I just so much, there's alleged stuff, but it's just so creepy, all the things that they found. And it's really interesting to me that Life magazine came out and did a story on it. I think that's interesting. And just all the owners going back and forth and who owns it and who doesn't own it. That's really strange.
I do want to say regarding, so I wanted to mention this towards the end, but I feel like it makes sense here.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was curious about like the timing of everything, because I read that book, The Carver Effect, came out in 1979, and that the Life magazine feature just happened to be a year later. And I, out of curiosity, looked up when the Amityville horror novel came out, and it actually came out in 1977. So 2 years before The Carver Effect. So we can discuss this more later, but I just find the timing kind of interesting, because to me, as the Hinshaw family and like the Von Bober family, Raymond being Ginger's dad, like, wouldn't it make sense if, like, let's say your daughter purchased this property that maybe was in disrepair and they were having troubles renovating it and they were losing money on it. Well, how about let's tell the story about how Ginger's husband went crazy and did all these crazy things, and put it out as a story about this haunting, and then get people to come there and buy the book and be really interested in it. And then all of a sudden you're making money off of this whole story. And, it's all about how your family was kind of like the heroes in the situation. I just find it interesting, I will say. So
absolutely.
Because it seems like all of the legitimate stories of hauntings, like all the actual like first person cases came from this one family. Like everyone else was like, yeah, we didn't think it was haunted, yada, yada, yada. And everything kind of stems from the Hinshaws / Von Bobers, whatever.
Yeah.
I just think it's kind of odd that like everything would only come from that one group. But yeah, we can talk about that a little bit more.
We'll bring that up and everything.
Yeah.